Usually when we talk about a country's development, there's this underlying expectation of precision.
Right. Like it's a hard science.
Exactly. It's treated almost like structural engineering or something.
Okay.
You look at a nation's bank account, you look at its gross domestic product, you measure, I don't know, the miles of high-speed rail or the number of skyscrapers.
High-tech hospital infrastructure.
Yeah, all those concrete things. And the economists just point at those things and say, there it is. That's why those citizens live longer.
It's a very binary way of looking at the world, honestly. The traditional equation is simply that more wealth automatically equals better health.
Exactly. It's clean. The assumption is that you literally, buy your way to a longer life. If your country has the cash, your people get the years.
Right. And if your country is poor, the lifespan is short.
Which is almost comforting in a weird way. Because we like human progress to be visible, to be categorized, to feel predictable.
We want a direct line between the national treasury and the biological clock of the average citizen.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality of human development is rarely a straight line.
Right. And that is exactly where we are going today. We're taking a deep dive into a developmental landscape that completely, honestly, just shatters those standard assumptions.
It really does.
We have a puzzle today that had me staring at the data for hours trying to make the math work. So here's the central mystery for you to chew on as you listen. How does a lower middle income country manage to give its citizens an extra year of life compared to the global average?
It's a profound paradox, especially when you look at the raw numbers side by side.
Let me drop this data on you right out of the gate. In 2023, the global average life expectancy is 73.4 years.
Okay.
But in Bangladesh, it is 74.7 years.
A full year and some change above the world average.
But here's the cognitive dissonance. Here's the thing that makes you scratch your head. Bangladesh's gross national income per capita, the measure of average wealth per person, basically, is less than 42% of the world average, which is a massive gap.
Massive. We're talking about $8,497 in Bangladesh compared to a global average of $20,327.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at this and thinking, I just don't understand how that math works.
Right.
How does a nation with a fraction of the global wealth engineer this massive health reverse takeover?
Which is exactly why the 30-year longitudinal study we're dissecting today is so vital. We're looking at data stretching from 1990 all the way to 2023, charting Bangladesh's progress.
30 years of data.
Yeah, exactly. And our goal here isn't just to recite a bunch of statistical games, The mission of this deep dive is to answer a much larger question for you. How should we redefine the true meaning of development?
Wow, yeah.
Because if less than half the global average income can still buy you more than the global average lifespan, then our old definitions of what makes a country developed are fundamentally flawed.
That is the perfect way to frame it. So we're going to unpack how Bangladesh moved from the absolute margins of the global stage to this incredible state of systemic resilience. We're going to get into the logistics of their health miracles, too.
Right, literally how they did it without building mega hospitals on every corner. But we aren't going to sugarcoat the reality either.
No, definitely not.
We're going to explore their stubborn education gaps, dive deep into a massive gender paradox that is actively holding their economy back, and finally, we'll look at an environmental scorecard that puts the industrialized world to shame.
It's a complex journey. And to really grasp it, we need to pull back and look at the macro trajectory of their catch-up over the last 3 decades.
Let's do it. So, to measure this catch-up, the report relies on the Human Development Index. Now, before we throw around acronyms, let's establish what this actually is. The HDI isn't just a measure of money.
No, it's a composite score.
Right. It blends health, education, and standard of living into one number between 0 and 1. 1 being like utopia, and 0 being absolute collapse.
Correct. It was created specifically to counter the idea that GDP is the only way to measure a country's success. It forces us to ask, are the people actually capable of living long, knowledgeable, and creative lives?
So looking at Bangladesh's HDI from 1990 to 2023, the trajectory is staggering. They skyrocketed by 72.5%.
That's a huge leap.
They moved from a very low score of 0.397 back in 1990 up to a solid 0.685 in 2023. If you look at the data visually, There is a graph showing Bangladesh's line climbing up to meet the world average line.
And the world average grew, too, from 0.608 to 0.756 in that same time.
Right, but the gap between them, this gray shadow on the graph, is visibly, relentlessly shrinking. They are marching toward what's classified as medium-high human development.
But the nuance is in the composition of that score. The overall number is impressive, but it masks a highly uneven development model.
Uneven how?
Well, if we break down that HDI into its three core dimensions, the health, the education, and the income, we don't see balanced, symmetrical growth.
Right, if you map it on a radar chart, it's not a perfect circle expanding equally in all directions.
Not at all. It's heavily skewed. Let's slice the data to see where the real heavy lifting is happening. First, health, which is measured by life expectancy at birth. As we establish, Bangladesh leads the world average here.
74.7 years versus the global 73.4.
Exactly. But then we pivot to education, which the index measures through the mean years of schooling for adults.
Yeah.
Here, Bangladesh lags significantly.
How bad is lag?
Adults in Bangladesh have an average of 6.79 years of schooling, compared to the global average of 8.7 years.
Oof, that's nearly a full 2-year deficit in just basic time spent in a classroom.
Yes. And then we look at the third dimension, income, the gross national income per capita. And as you mentioned at the start, Bangladesh is far, far behind.
So if we want to visualize this, think of Bangladesh's development like a 3-horse chariot.
Okay, I like that.
You have these 3 horses pulling the nation forward through the decades. The income horse and the education horse, they're definitely moving. They are trotting along at a decent, steady pace.
We've got a health horse.
That horse is an absolute powerhouse. It's sprinting ahead, pulling the entire chariot forward almost by itself.
That is a great analogy. The health dimension is the undisputed engine of their HDI growth. And the reason this matters, the reason economists and public health officials study this specific chariot, is because it shatters that core assumption of late 20th century development theory.
The assumption about wealth and health.
Exactly. The prevailing belief was that you needed massive tax bases to build massive, centralized medical infrastructure to significantly extend life. This data proves that health can be driven by alternative, lower-cost mechanisms.
Which brings up the most pressing question I have. Okay, let's unpack this. Walk me through the actual logistics of this. If they aren't relying on multi-billion-dollar healthcare infrastructure, how are they adding these years to their citizens' lives?
That's a great question.
I mean, dropping the mortality rate requires actual medical intervention. What does the data tell us about the how?
Let's start by looking at who is living longer. There's a fascinating gender split right away. According to the data, Bangladeshi women are living to 76.4 years, while men are at 73.0 years.
That is a massive achievement for female life expectancy, especially given the economic context. But there's one specific metric in our sources today that literally made me stop reading and reread the paragraph.
The maternal mortality data.
Yes, it's the maternal mortality ratio. Let me give you the numbers. In 1990, 906 out of every 100,000 live births resulted in the mother's death.
Nearly 1 in 100, a tragic, overwhelming rate of mortality.
But by 2023, that number plummeted to 123.
A drop of over 86%.
Okay, stop right there. I don't understand how that happens. You do not drop maternal mortality from over 900 down to 123 with just good intentions.
No, you certainly don't.
How does a nation with $8,400 per capita income achieve an 86% reduction in mothers dying during childbirth? Because in my head, the only way to stop hemorrhage or eclampsia or infection is an operating room, a surgeon, and a sterilized ward. How are they doing this?
This is exactly where we have to reevaluate our mental models of what a healthcare system looks like. What Bangladesh achieved is the absolute triumph of nonlinear, low-cost health interventions.
Nonlinear interventions, what does that look like on the ground?
You're right that in the West, we solved maternal mortality with concrete infrastructure, hospitals, ambulances, surgical suites. But when a nation's resources are intensely constrained, relying on heavy infrastructure means millions will die waiting for the hospitals to be built.
So what was the alternative? What did they do instead of waiting?
Human infrastructure. Following their independence in 1971, the country was devastated. The traditional healthcare system was practically non-existent. In that void, non-governmental organizations, most notably BRA, alongside the government, pioneered a radically different approach.
BRSC, the NGO.
Right. They didn't wait for the patients to come to the clinics. They brought the clinics to the living rooms. They deployed absolute armies of female community health workers.
Wait, so these aren't doctors with medical degrees?
No, not at all. These were women recruited from the very villages they served. They were given intense, highly specific training on a few crucial life-saving interventions.
Oh, wow.
They mobilized society at the grassroots level. They went door to door, educating families on sanitation, ensuring pregnant women got basic prenatal care, distributing vaccinations, and teaching something fundamentally revolutionary, which is oral rehydration therapy, or ORT.
Let's pause on that because I've heard of oral rehydration therapy, but I want to make sure I actually understand it. Is that just drinking water when you are sick?
It is far more precise than that,
Yeah.
and it's arguably one of the most important medical advances of the 20th century. Before this, diarrheal diseases like cholera were a primary killer of children and vulnerable adults in the developing world.
Because of the dehydration.
Exactly. When you have severe diarrhea, your body flushes out water and vital electrolytes so fast that your organs just shut down. The traditional Western treatment was intravenous fluids, an IV drip.
Which requires a hospital, sterile needles, nurses, and saline bags.
Exactly. And in a rural village in 1980s Bangladesh, that was impossible. But scientists discovered a physiological mechanism in the intestine. If you mix a very specific ratio of sugar and salt into clean water, the sugar helps the intestine actively absorb the salt and the water, bypassing the diarrheal flush.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it hydrates the body almost as effectively as an IV.
Oh, wow. So the sugar acts like a key unlocking the cells to let the water in.
Precisely. And the brilliance of the Bangladesh model wasn't just using ORT, it was the delivery system. Those community health workers went to millions of households and taught mothers how to make this solution, using a pinch of local salt, a handful of unrefined sugar, and clean water.
That's incredible.
They empowered mothers to become the primary health providers. They bypassed the need for a hospital entirely for one of the nation's biggest killers.
It's not about complex technology. It's about the mass distribution of simple, vital knowledge.
And that reliance on human infrastructure creates a very unique, localized systemic resilience. We can actually see this resilience proved in the data during the 2020 to 2021 pandemic period.
Right, the global dip. Every country took a hit to life expectancy during COVID.
They did. And if you look at the life expectancy graph for Bangladesh, there's a fluctuating dip during those pandemic years. Life expectancy dropped slightly to 71.2 in 2021. But what's remarkable is the bounce back.
How fast was it?
By 2022, it's already surging back up to nearly 73, and then hit that record 74.7 by 2023.
Why did they bounce back so fast compared to others?
Because a decentralized, community-based health network is inherently flexible. When a centralized hospital system is overwhelmed, the whole system freezes. But when your health network consists of tens of thousands of local workers already embedded in the community, you can pivot rapidly to distribute information, track outbreaks, and deliver basic care without the bottlenecks of centralized infrastructure.
That makes total sense.
It's a resilience that many expensive, highly advanced Western systems actually struggled to replicate during the same period.
Okay, I am completely sold on the ingenuity of the health interventions, but I have to push back a little here. A long life is great, but if they're living to 74 years old, what does their daily life actually look like?
That's the real question.
Because a long life spent in grinding relentless poverty isn't necessarily a development win. We have to look at the economic engine. Right?
Absolutely. Moving from the macro lifespan to the micro reality of daily living is essential. We have to look at what their growing income actually buys them.
Well, let's celebrate the raw economic win first, because the growth is undeniable. Over these 3 decades, income in Bangladesh quintupled.
5 times higher.
Yeah. They went from $733 per capita in 1990 to $8,497 in 2023. And looking at the trend line, there is this distinct kink in the graph. Right around 2010, the slope gets dramatically steeper. They hit some serious economic acceleration.
That acceleration is largely tied to the explosion of the ready-made garment sector, the RMG industry, which integrated Bangladesh deeply into global supply chains. The raw numbers of GDP and GNI growth are impressive. They pulled millions above the World Bank's extreme poverty line.
But I knew it, so they aren't all just rich and comfortable now.
Not at all. And this is where we have to introduce a crucial concept, which is the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or the MPI.
The MPI.
Right. Because earning 5 times more money, say, going from $1 a day to $5 a day, doesn't mean your life is suddenly perfect in every category. It doesn't mean multidimensional poverty magically disappears.
Okay, break down what multidimensional poverty actually means for the listener, because when I hear poverty, I just think of a lack of money in a bank account.
The MPI was designed to look at the actual lived experience of deprivation. It looks at overlapping deprivations at the household level. It asks, regardless of your daily cash income, What are you fundamentally lacking? Do you have a dirt floor? Do you have access to a toilet? Are your children malnourished? Is anyone in the house educated?
So you could theoretically have a job that pays you enough cash to technically escape the extreme income poverty metric of $2.15 a day. But if you go home to a house with no electricity, no sanitation, and you can't afford nutritious food, you're still experiencing intense multidimensional poverty.
Precisely. The MPI provides the micro-truth of a nation's development. And if we slice up the MPI data for Bangladesh from 2022, it paints a very specific, somewhat sobering picture of where the struggles remain despite the income growth.
What's driving it?
The data shows us exactly what is driving the poverty that still exists.
So what are the biggest drivers?
Number one, 26.1% of their multidimensional poverty is driven by poor nutrition.
Wow, over a quarter of the poverty experience is just a lack of quality food.
Yes. Number two, 24.8% is driven by a lack of years of schooling. And number three, 11.7% is related to poor housing conditions.
Think about the implications of that. It completely makes you rethink how we measure success on a global scale. A country can multiply its income by 5. It can point to soaring GDP graphs. But a quarter of the poverty their citizens still experience on a daily basis is simply not getting enough of the right nutrients to fuel their bodies and brains.
It's a stark reality.
Another quarter is the lack of education. It really highlights the shift from simply surviving to the quality of survival.
It's the difference between having enough cash to buy bulk rice to stop your stomach from aching and having the resources to buy a balanced, nutrient-dense diet, put a solid roof over your head, and keep your kids in a quality school. The income horse on our chariot is trotting faster, yes, but the nutrition and education aspects are acting like anchors dragging in the dirt.
And the MPI data just revealed that education is a massive source of that drag. So we have to look closely at this education gap. It is clearly the weak link in Bangladesh's development chain.
It is undoubtedly the most stubborn hurdle they face.
Let's look at the gap between what is expected and what is actually happening. The data says a child in Bangladesh today can expect 12.3 years of schooling.
Which sounds fantastic.
Right. It's very close to the global expectation of 13.0 years. It means the physical schools are there and the kids are enrolling.
Enrollment at the primary level is indeed very high. The initial access has been solved, but retention is the crisis.
Right, because when we look at the actual mean years of schooling, how long adults have actually sat in a classroom, it's only 6.79 years. They are sitting a full 2.0 years behind the global average of 8.7 actual years of schooling.
It's a massive drop-off.
Exactly. We need a way to visualize this. Instead of looking at it like a restaurant where you expect a 12-course meal but only get 6, let's think about it like a leaky pipeline.
Like a leaky pipeline.
The government has built this massive pipeline to deliver education. Getting kids to enroll in first grade is like pumping a huge surge of water into the start of the pipe. The expectation is that the water travels 12.3 miles to the end, but the pipeline is riddled with holes. By mile 6, half the water has drained into the soil. By mile 10, it's just a trickle. Where are the leaks? Why are children dropping out halfway through?
The leaks in that pipeline are almost entirely structural and economic pressures. At age 10, 12, 14, the cost of keeping a child in school isn't just the price of books, it is the opportunity cost of their labor.
Ah, I see.
For boys, the pressure to enter the informal economy and earn wages is immense. For girls, the leaks are often tied to child marriage, domestic labor, and a lack of gender-specific infrastructure, like, say sanitation facilities in rural schools once they hit puberty.
So the leaks are essentially inequality in action. Poverty and structural barriers are forcing kids out of the pipeline.
Exactly. And the UN development reports have a specific mathematical way to measure the damage caused by these leaks. We need to introduce the concept of the inequality-adjusted HDI.
Okay. The penalty for unfairness. Walk us through how this works conceptually.
Think of the standard HDI score of 0.685 as the average temperature of a room. It sounds comfortable, but an average hides the extremes. What if half the room is freezing and half is on fire?
The average still looks fine.
But the reality for the people in the room is miserable. The inequality-adjusted HDI, or IHDI, penalizes the overall score based on how unequally the health, wealth, and education are distributed among the population.
So it asks, is everyone experiencing this development or just a lucky few at the top?
Exactly. And when you apply this penalty to Bangladesh, the results are painful. When you adjust their 0.685 HEI for inequality, the score drops by 29.6%.
Wow.
It plunges down to 0.482.
That is brutal. Almost 30% of their human development progress is just wiped out mathematically because it's not distributed evenly.
And if we zero in on the breakdown of that 29.6% loss, we find the core culprit. Yes, income inequality causes damage to the score, life expectancy inequality causes damage. But the loss from education inequality is staggering. It sits at 35.3%. That specific penalty for educational inequality is much higher than the world average.
So inequality is literally eating away at their hard-won development gains. Some kids are making it all the way through the 12-mile pipeline, getting university degrees, and joining the modern global economy. But a massive portion of the population is falling through the cracks at mile 6, forever locked out of higher-tier opportunities.
It creates a bifurcated society. And if education inequality is holding back national development so severely, the next logical question is, who is bearing the brunt of this inequality? To answer that, we must cross-reference this educational data with gender.
Which brings us to what I think is the most complex, frustrating, and fascinating part of all the source material. The gender paradox.
Is the ultimate bottleneck for their future growth.
Let's start with the baseline, the Gender Development Index, or GDI. This basically compares the HDI of women directly to the HDI of men. For Bangladesh, the GDI is up to 0.918. Now, that number shows absolute, undeniable progress over the last 30 years. Women are vastly better off today than they were in 1990.
The absolute gains in health and basic schooling for women are historic.
But Bangladesh is still classified in Group 4 globally, which means medium to high inequalities remain. If we look at the pure HDI split, female HDI is at 0.650, while male HDI is higher at 0.708. So the gap is still there.
And to understand why the gap is there, we have to look past the achievements and examine the structural constraints. For that, we use the Gender Inequality Index, the GII. This measures the barriers that actively prevent women from participating in society fully.
What's their score?
Bangladesh's GII is 0.487. To give you context, that is worse than the global average of 0.455.
Where do we see these barriers most clearly?
We see them vividly in political and economic life. For example, only 20.9% of parliament seats are held by women.
So just 1 in 5 lawmakers. That means the laws and policies shaping the future of the country are overwhelmingly designed by men.
Yes, but the most alarming statistic, the one that truly defines this paradox we've been mentioning, is found in the labor market.
Yes. If you are listening to this, I want you to mentally picture 2 different charts. This is the data comparison that absolutely blew my mind. Chart number 1 is secondary education. According to the data, 43.2% of women have some secondary education, and 48.0% of men have it.
That is near parity, a very small gap of less than 5 percentage points.
Exactly. Think about how massive a policy win that is. They have achieved incredible success in getting girls to stay in the pipeline through high school. It's almost equal to the boys. But now look at chart number 2, jobs. The labor force participation rate, the percentage of people actually working or looking for work. For women, it is 43.4%, but for men, it is a massive 80.8%.
A gargantuan 37.4 percentage point gap.
I don't get it. How does that happen? You spend all this time, energy, and money getting the girls through high school at roughly the same rate as the boys. But when it comes time to enter the economy and use that education, nearly half the female workforce just vanishes. Where do they go?
This is the severe misalignment of degrees and societal roles. Getting girls into school was a celebrated triumph of government policy and NGO intervention. But the data shows us a harsh reality. Simply building schools and handing out diplomas isn't enough to change an economy.
Because the economy and the culture have to be ready to accept them.
Precisely. Once a woman graduates, she hits a wall of societal expectations. The burden of unpaid domestic care work falls almost entirely on women. The cultural expectation that a woman's primary role is within the household post-marriage is incredibly rigid.
So the leak in the pipeline isn't just during school. The biggest leak is the moment they graduate.
And we also have to look at the structure of the labor market itself. Earlier, we mentioned the ready-made garment sector. That industry was revolutionary because it brought millions of young rural women into the formal workforce for the first time.
Right.
But it also created a ceiling. It is often low-wage, highly repetitive labor. And as women age or get married or have children, the lack of childcare infrastructure and the inflexibility of those factory jobs force them right back out of the labor force.
It's a glass ceiling, but it's reinforced by both cultural expectations and the rigid structure of the jobs available.
It is a profound loss. Half of the country's intellectual, creative, and economic productivity is trapped behind that glass ceiling. They have educated millions of women, but the economic structure hasn't evolved to absorb their talent into higher value sectors. From a purely developmental standpoint, it is a massive loss of potential GDP and human flourishing.
It's like charging a battery to 100% capacity and then just leaving it in the kitchen drawer. It's full of potential energy that is never allowed to power the machine. So let's recap where we are. They have this sprinting health horse pulling the nation forward with brilliant, low-cost community care. They have a lagging education horse struggling with massive inequality and pipeline leaks. And they have this gender paradox keeping half the educated economy on the sidelines. It sounds like an incredibly mixed bag.
It is the reality of complex real-world development.
But despite the struggles with education and gender, there is one area in the data where Bangladesh is an undisputed global role model. And honestly, it is something the industrialized high-income world desperately needs to learn from.
I would argue this is the most vital takeaway from the entire report for the 21st century.
Let's introduce our final acronym, but it's a good one, the PHDI. The Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI. Now, this metric is fascinating. It acts as an environmental audit on human progress.
It's a reality check, really.
Yeah, it asks a terrifying question for the developed world. What happens to a country's development score when you penalize them for the carbon emissions they pump into the air and the raw materials they rip out of the earth?
It attempts to measure whether a country's development is achieved at the expense of the planet's future.
And the contrast between the global average and Bangladesh is stark. When you factor in planetary destruction, the global average HDI drops by a massive 10.05%. The world as a whole is heavily penalized because our progress, historically, is deeply fundamentally destructive. But Bangladesh, when you audit their development for environmental damage, their HDI drops by a mere 2.77%.
The carbon data explains exactly why that drop is so small. The average citizen in Bangladesh emits just 0.66 tons of CO2 per capita. Let's compare that to the global average, which sits at a very heavy 4.54 tons.
So they're emitting a fraction of the global average. But I have to play devil's advocate here. Are they a low-carbon role model on purpose? Or are they just too poor to pollute right now? If they had the money, wouldn't they just buy the massive SUVs, build the coal plants, and pave over the wetlands just like the US, Europe, and China did? Is this policy, or is this just circumstantial poverty?
That is the essential debate in climate economics.
Yep.
Yes, a significant portion of their low footprint is due to lower overall industrialization and consumption compared to the West. However, to dismiss it entirely as circumstantial poverty ignores the trajectory.
Because of how fast they've grown.
Remember, their income quintupled. Their life expectancy shot past the global average. They have achieved rapid, life-altering human development without the corresponding hockey stick explosion in emissions that characterized Western development.
Ah, I see. So the achievement isn't just they don't pollute. The achievement is they developed rapidly while not polluting at the expected rate.
Exactly. And they are uniquely motivated to figure out green development because Bangladesh is essentially ground zero for climate vulnerability. Their geography makes them acutely susceptible to rising sea levels, cyclones, and flooding. They cannot afford to follow the high-carbon Western model because the consequences of that model are literally washing away their coastlines.
And the result of this low-carbon, high-health trajectory is a massive leap in global rankings, right?
It completely upends the traditional hierarchy of nations.
On the standard traditional HDI list, the one that doesn't care about the environment, Bangladesh ranks 136th in the world. But if you change the rules of the game, if you adjust for environmental impact and rank countries by how sustainably they develop using the PHDI, Bangladesh shoots up 47 spots to rank 89th globally.
It proves a revolutionary economic concept. For decades, the ironclad assumption was that to develop, you had to pollute. You had to burn coal, extract endlessly, and prioritize wealth over the ecosystem. Bangladesh is a textbook example of low-carbon resilience.
It's amazing.
They are achieving the most vital parts of human development, like longer lives, better survival rates, without breaking the planet.
It really makes you question who the developing nations really are in this context. If the advanced nations are structurally reliant on destroying the biosphere to maintain their scores, maybe their development is a dead end.
That is the paradigm shift the data demands.
Okay, as we bring all these threads together, the report outlines a survive to thrive pyramid for Bangladesh's next 30 years. It's a roadmap for the future based on all the data we've discussed today in this session.
It is a strategy with 3 distinct layers of focus.
First, the base of the pyramid. They must maintain that incredible low-carbon green development advantage. As their economy continues to grow, they have to resist the temptation of dirty energy. That green resilience is their superpower on the global stage.
Second, the core of the pyramid. They absolutely have to plug the leaks in the education pipeline. They need to turn those 12.3 expected years of schooling into actual high-quality time in the classroom for everyone, bridging that brutal inequality gap.
And finally, the peak of the pyramid. They must dismantle the structural gender discrimination in the labor market. If they can shatter that glass ceiling, redefine the cultural expectations of unpaid care work, and unleash the trapped potential of the female workforce, their economy will fundamentally transform.
It is about translating parity in the classroom into parity in the boardroom and the marketplace. To synthesize all of this for you, the listener, what the Bangladesh data ultimately proves is that human development is a choice, not just a byproduct of wealth.
Absolutely.
Even when financial resources are highly constrained, making the right social policy choices, like investing in community health workers over concrete hospitals, can create health, resilience, and dignity that vastly outpaces raw, unguided economic growth.
I couldn't agree more. We started this deep dive by comparing development to a clean, precise engineering equation and found out it is so much more human and so much more complex than just counting dollars. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. If a lower middle income country can give its people longer lives, bounce back faster from global pandemics, drastically reduce maternal mortality, and do it all with a fraction of the carbon footprint, maybe the advanced global north isn't actually the ultimate gold standard for human development after all. Maybe, as we look at the future of our incredibly fragile planet, it's the global south that will end up teaching the rest of us how to truly survive and thrive. Think about that the next time you hear someone use the phrase developing nation.